Learning Summit. You're in the right spot. Welcome. We're about to begin our session on our second courseware session on the Open Learning Initiative from OLI. We have joining us today Hal Turner, who's OLI Partner and Community Manager, as well as, shoot, I don't have the faculty member's name here. Hal, who's joining you today? Do you have a faculty colleague joining?
It's on the slide.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Read the slide, MJ. Kim Law. Sorry about that, Kim. Assistant Professor Computer Information Systems from Arundel Community College, one of our own here in the state. As I understand it, Norman is literally teaching as we speak and is running a little bit late, but I believe Hal and Kim are ready to go. Oh, is Norman back?
he appears to have just arrived.
Outstanding. All right, well, I stalled long enough for you to get back, Norman. A couple of just quick things, logistics. Once again, if you're interested in adopting one of these tools, you'd like more information, please don't hesitate to send an email to cai@usmd.edu. And also I'll repeat that we're asking folks to stay muted. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. We're not giving our providers much time to get through what they need to get through. So we'll make sure that your questions get answered either in the chat or vocally by our presenters. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Hal and Norman and Kim get started.
Thanks, MJ. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. My name is Hal Turner. I am the Open Learning Initiative Partner and Community Manager. That's a fancy way of saying that I'm essentially customer enablement. It's my job to make sure that you have all of your all of the help that you need and all your questions answered through your OLI journey. I'm joined today by the director of OLI, Norman Bier, who you met earlier, and by Associate Professor of Computer Information Systems at Arundel, Kim Law. Kim, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Hal. Hi, Norman, good to see you again. Thank you for having me and letting me jump in on this session. I am an assistant professor of computer information systems at Arundel, but I have had the privilege of working with the Maryland Community College system for a number of years. Maryland received several rounds of TACT funding, 7, 8, 9 years ago, and I was part of the original TACT group that was led by Arundel. So I've had the privilege of working across Maryland for a long time. And absolutely the privilege of working with the team at OLI. So I've taught with OLI coursework and actually helped develop some along the way. I think it's a really incredible organization and hopefully a tremendous resource for you, especially in the time of COVID and as we're transitioning. I'm an engineer by trade, but an educator at heart. So no matter all of the jobs that I've ever worked in, I've always found my heart in training the folks around me. I finally took the plunge, 15 years ago, and finally just moved into education officially and have loved every bit of it. So I'm thrilled to be here and hope that my experiences can help you along your journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. So I'll go ahead and hopefully share my screen properly. As intimately familiar as I am with Zoom, I never feel confident that I've got it just right when it comes to sharing my screen. So I'm going to share my desktop first.
I've spent 4 months on Zoom living here. I still find that I'm putting things in the wrong place when I'm teaching. It's like the chat's blocking the participants list, which is blocking my PowerPoint. Bonkers.
Yep. And I've compounded the complication by using multiple monitors and using the multiple monitor feature in Zoom, which is hard to master. Okay, so let's go to the slides first. Okay, are we seeing, I'm sharing the desktop that the slides are on. Are you seeing them?
Yes.
Yeah, we're thumbs upping, Hal, but you can't see us, right?
No, I can now, multiple monitors. Okay, so let's talk about what OLI is. for the purposes, you know, OLI is a long running research project. We've been around a long time, but for the purposes of this kind of event, we're going to focus on what OLI is primarily to faculty, and that's courses. We're complete courses like textbook replacements and supplemental materials. And as you can see, we have courses in lots of different disciplines. We've got more than 40 at this point, and you can find them all on the website. In fact, I put the link to the course catalog in the chat if anybody would like to follow that link, and you can see all of our current offerings. We've got lots in development, of course, so we'll be bolstering that number soon. Hopefully at some point, somebody from the University of Maryland system would join us in that effort and add to our numbers. We are a team that still operates as a non-for-profit at Carnegie Mellon University. So we're a small team that really operates in the entire educational system environment. Our core team is about 15 people, but we are really all of the students around the world who have used our materials, all of the instructors who have taught with them, who have contributed to the research efforts and to the creation of our materials. So while we are a small group at CMU and we remain you know, members of the higher education family, the OLI family itself is actually a global one. We build courses for, you know, by higher ed for higher ed. That's how we like to think about ourselves. And increasingly, we are more than just the delivery of these materials, but also the ability for faculty like yourself to author or customize them through our tool called Echo. That's not going to be our focus today, but we do have, I will touch on it and answer any questions anybody has, but we also have workshops. Every week we run workshops. I also put the link in the chat. We run workshops on how to use Echo, how to use the OLI platform and deliver it with your students, and also what we call learning engineering topics. So course design or designing for data collection, things of that nature. As Norm mentioned earlier, this is his slide. We've been around for nearly 2 decades and have seen really, really positive effects, up to 6 times the learning in half the time, with improvement in retention and transfer. We're closing traditional gaps, and one of the things we like to focus on is the iterative improvement aspect, which is where the data comes in, and the iterative improvement aspect of the OLI course development process is really what helps the courses improve over time. We have a lot of relationships, a lot of long-standing relationships with Maryland institutions. Norm can talk really, actually, so can Kim, talk really intimately about these relationships if you want to go into any of them, especially during the Q&A period. But we've been partners for a long time, and we really value this partnership. One thing we want to stress is that with these courses, it's for Maryland instructors and students, you can get started quickly. It's really easy. It takes about, you know, if you use our configuration tool to set up your course and use the default settings, it can take about 3 minutes to set up your course. And if you like, we can arrange for single sign-on in your LMS. You get support directly from OLI support, as well as the workshops that I mentioned earlier. So we've got lots of opportunities to support you and help you in your professional development efforts. This is the link that I mentioned earlier, oli.cmu.edu/courses, where you can see our entire course catalog.
Hal, I'm going to jump in here for a second. I know as a faculty member that we typically are dealing with multiple sources of information, and we're required to use a lot of different, I know even in my own department, right? We've adopted many different textbooks using many different publishers and publishers' content. I know the idea of trying to add one more thing, give this a try, it just takes 3 or 4 minutes, seems unrealistic. And I will tell you that, like any system, you have to get used to using a new system, and OLI would be new to many of you. But what I think sets OLI apart is that if you need help from Pearson, you get thrown into the 1-800 number block of whatever Pearson decides to deliver you, especially when you need it the most. I know the team at OLI, and I know for sure that if you said, I really want to give this a try, but I'm a little intimidated by trying to do something entirely new, I know for sure that the team at OLI will truly hold your hand and help you with that, because their commitment is to your students and your students' success. So trying something new can be really hard, but I would say please be really open-minded and know that you are going to get an unparalleled level of support from Norman and Hal and the phenomenal team that they work with every day.
Thanks. Really appreciate that. So before I jump into a demonstration of the platform, it helps to have a little context about the history of OLI, because it comes to bear on why courses are designed and delivered the way that they are. We've been around for a long time. We were conceived in 2001, begun work in earnest in 2002, as a research and production project whose primary goal, at least at the time, was to answer the question of what works in online instruction. You know, we weren't going to get it right out of the gate, but we needed to find out what was going to work. Where did we settle? This is the foundation for the entire OLI experience, the student-centered, measurable learning objective. There are a few reasons that it's essentially the hub of the OLI course. We will include things like action verbs so that you can design exercises that will measure students' ability to master these learning objectives. We use them to create a sort of skill mapping structure so that you can collect data on them. And essentially it also helps you align your course material to the intended outcomes for your students. We also learn by doing. That's our mantra. We practice early and often, and one of the findings of the research that we employ most feverishly, I would say, is to ensure that everything is in line instead of disparate. So instead of having homework in one area and videos in another and reading in a third area, everything is linear and embedded. So a student will encounter a concept and learn about it in some manner, you know, a video, reading, etc., but then immediately puts it into practice right there on the page, isn't asked to go somewhere else. And that's going to be the case on every page. In those exercises, we provide immediate targeted feedback, really carefully designed questions and their answers can be incredibly instructive. So instead of designing a question with one correct answer, you know, most of them are multiple choice. The majority are multiple choice. We have lots and lots of questions of different forms, including material from outside the system that we can bring in. But the majority of questions are going to end up being multiple choice. And for example, a thoughtfully designed question is not going to have one correct answer and then 3 incorrect answers that are obvious, but rather they're designed to address the misconceptions that students will present at this point. And then because we can provide immediate feedback as they select those incorrect answers, we can address those misconceptions right there with the feedback.
I think a lot of this plays, sorry, Hal, I'm going to interrupt you there. We were hearing from the plenary that, you know, one of the real places that these kinds of adaptive systems can have major impact is in the ways that they can support and interact with course redesign. And I think these these pieces play with all of that, all right? That notion that in really crisply starting with measurable student-centered learning outcomes, what we're asking is for folks to think carefully about what's important for your learner to do, what is important for your learner to know, and then think about how these align and tie with the kinds of activities they're engaging in, and how does this also tie in with the ways that they're going to get off track, right? So, we're not looking to build stems and distractors in our questions. We want to focus on things that are misconceptions and problems. I don't want to distract my learners. But all of this, particularly as we get to this data point, feeds into an iterative cycle of course design, of course redesign, and of course improvement. And I think this is where we see impact.
And from our perspective as faculty, Norman, I know at AACC we're embarking on the next cycle of accreditation and our own self-study and preparing for that. The OLI course design focus in learning objectives really does help with any accreditation process and any sort of program evaluation that you do, because it does really target it specifically to the outcomes for the students.
So from a, I guess that was my last slide. From a, a literal standpoint, those, here I'm distracting myself with this. How do I click exit? There we go. The ability to collect data through those interactions and present it to the instructor is also vital. Those interactions are all tagged with skills, and the more a learner interacts with questions using those skills, the more we know about what they do and do not know, and then we can present that to you in a learning dashboard, which I'll show you shortly. So, are you now seeing the syllabus for General Chemistry 1? Okay, great. Just a quick demo of the platform and the dashboard, and then I think we should throw it to Kim so she can talk to us about her experiences. I think that's really what's most valuable here, of course. When a student accesses OLI, they're going to start here on the syllabus page, which is a layout of all of the units and modules, along with the high stakes assessments and the major activities. So, for instance, we've got a virtual lab here, and we have quizzes, and that if a schedule had been applied, the student would see that here. You'll jump into any one of the modules, and as a student, you'll see all of the learning objectives presented right up front. These are all the learning objectives that you're going to encounter on any of the pages in this module, so that you know what to expect, along with a little table of contents of the module content. We'll head into mass and volume of solution. Again, we start with the learning objectives at the top of the page. We've got action verbs, so that the student can demonstrate through their interaction with the exercises on the page whether they're mastering the underlying skills in these learning objectives. As I mentioned, you get a little bit of instruction. And here we've got a nice little slideshow that is a worked example of calculating the mass of a desired substance in a chemical reaction. And then right there, we learn by doing. We put it into practice. This one is a drag and drop where the student is asked to create the chemical equation based on what's up, on the information given. In this case, it's difficult to provide targeted feedback for the incorrect answers. But let me show you what the correct answer can do. What we do is we give a little bit of reinforcement in the correct answer here, so that you can address, you provide a little bit of instruction in case the student might have been guessing. But I'll show you a good example down here of targeted feedback. So the student has to calculate the number of the grams of carbon dioxide, and when they choose the incorrect answer, what we've got is the subject matter expert who wrote this question understands what the different outcomes of the calculations would be based on common mistakes. So in this case, the correct molar mass wasn't taken into account. In this case, the author knew that they inverted two values. And so this is a really good example of designing the question answers and their feedback to the common problems that your students are going to demonstrate. Courses are filled with these learn by doing exercises. Did I get this exercises? In this case, we're looking at chemistry, so we've got virtual lab activities. You know,
I'm going to interrupt you for
where
a second.
appropriate. Yeah.
In some of the learn by doings, and it may not be in this one just because of its placement in the course, there's also been an intentionality in many of them to provide students with a little bit of a support if they don't even know where to start to begin with. So there's many learn by doings that also offer a hint feature, which this one didn't happen to do. It probably is also just because of how far into the course it already is. But there are an awful lot of our students that will look at a problem and say, gosh, I still, even with the teaching support that I've just had in the practice, I still don't even know where to start. So there are many that provide a hint of just what is that little nudge that you would give a student in a face-to-face environment to say, well, think about this, what would I do next? And then hopefully nudge them on to being able to solve the problem themselves.
Yeah, and that's exactly. Another piece where we're bringing in a lot of research from our cognitive tutoring work, learning scientists, this notion that, you know, when we really drill in, we understand that there are certain numbers of hints and a certain structure that are most useful to learners. So we want to start off with a hint that helps them sort of orient themselves. If that's not enough, then we want to drop them down into a hint that brings them closer to the answer. And I think Hal was just showing that off there.
Yeah, so those were the hints. Sorry, did you have more, Norman?
Only that every time I see you give this demo, I hear the voice of my high school chemistry teacher shouting about Avogadro's number in the background. It's now 30 years in the past.
Yeah. So all of the data that's collected as students interact with the questions in an OLI course is useful in the sense that we can paint a picture of what they do and do not know, and we deliver that in a visualization here in the learning dashboard. When you visit the learning dashboard as an instructor, you see the learning objectives laid out from the entire module, along with an idea of how your students are performing on those learning objectives. Now, this is a dummy course with fake students, but they do fall into these representative buckets. Here we've got, you know, students who are in the green, have a strong learning estimate. That's our prediction that they would be successful on a new question on this learning objective based on what we've seen. Students can fall into a moderate level, a low learning level. These moderate and low learning levels are students who might need your intervention. They're probably struggling, and you can click on the bucket and see the names of the students and then contact them directly. The gray bucket is students who have not generated enough data yet through their interactions, either through total inaction or through simply not enough yet to generate a learning estimate. Over here, we've got the component skills of the learning objective. So calculate the mass of substance involved in a chemical reaction. And when you click on it, you can see all of the exercises in the module that have that skill applied to them. And then you could jump to it if you needed to refresh your memory about what the questions were. You can also see a report on how students are, that opened up in a new tab, sorry. Oh no, it opened up down below. How students are performing as a group, and address the misconceptions that they're presenting with their collective struggles. So on the questions where they answer, you know, you can take a look at what misconceptions they're demonstrating, and address that when you are in a recitation, in class, in a synchronous session online, etc.
Hal, can I interrupt you here for that?
Yep.
Can you go back to that previous screen where you could see the actual question and pick any question, right, where you see the aggregate at the bottom? Perfect. So the question that you know, comes to me very often as somebody who has taught with OLI is, how do you actually use it, right? What does it actually look like in your classroom? And for me, the most effective way that I have taught with it is when I've been able to assign the work prior to when I intend to actually instruct on it in class, right? So as an instructor, I would assign the work. Of course, not all of your students will complete the work, right? But when we get to class, this is what I will show them, right? It's less to me about the score, but more about that bar chart that you can see with those red and green bars on the left-hand side under question 1. Right? To me, this tells me how many of my students actually understood it and where were they struggling. But the best thing is that I can also show students, hey, it looks like a lot of you struggled with this concept, and now we need to address it a little more. If there are students if there are questions that most everybody got correct, it allows me to dial in on where my students are struggling the most. Again, this data is really crazy because it is a dummy course. When you have actual student data in there, it does give you the validation of where students have been succeeding, and also can be very eye-opening to figure out where students are struggling. So this is my check in a real-time way to say, where do they need the most help, and is it what I anticipate, or am I surprised? And I can tell you that I've been both, right? I've anticipated correctly and been surprised and had to retool. But I wouldn't have known that I needed to retool without information like this at my disposal.
And I think there's a great point that you raised and that just came up in the chat as well, because I use that same tactic, right? That, you know, when I walk into class, one of the first things that I'll do is throw this up on the projector and say to the students, look, here's what this system is telling me that you've got. Here's what the system's telling me that you're struggling. Is that accurate? Is that what you're feeling like? And on the one hand, this gives them a chance to participate and engage directly. And there's some other question types inside of OLI that also ask them to self-evaluate in that way. But one, it raises this point as an opportunity to start a discussion in class. But I've also found that on the back end, it shows the student that the work that they're doing within these materials has real and immediate impact. And so they start to take the process a little more seriously because they now see that their engagement is helping in this way, is helping to drive the class. One more point that sometimes gets lost. This is also the place where your combination of instructional expertise and domain knowledge come into play. And the reason I say it gets a little lost is, you know, my high school chemistry teacher, Mr. DiPaolo, will be appalled to hear that I have no idea what that question was about. And so I can't look at it and say, oh, I see what they're getting wrong here, and I know what I would do in the classroom. But when you show me that same kind of question around iteration in Introduction to Computer Science, say, oh, I can see that students are getting confused, the difference between for loops and while loops. And now I know what I'm going to do when I walk into the classroom. So that point of really being able to drill in on and make really good use of that face-to-face time, I think is pretty important. It's one of the things we've worked hard to get into the system.
Yeah, and Norman, now, especially as we have all moved to an exclusively online environment, one of the biggest challenges that I find when I hold sessions with my students is that it's not just, so what questions do you have for me? I actually can open the conversation by saying, here's what I see that you all have been doing. I want to address some of the issues that I've seen typically by me opening with information that is valuable to them, they tend to engage more. And getting engagement in a fully Zoom sort of space, as I hope everyone else has seen, please tell me it's just not me, it has been certainly more challenging than if we were fully face-to-face in a classroom. So having data that they contributed to making, and also hopefully seeing that I'm answering the questions that they themselves had, but may have been less likely to raise their hand virtually. My anecdotal feedback from my students is that it's very valuable, and they feel that it's a much better use of time than if I were to just simply say, hey, I'm here for whatever questions you have, and then enter the pregnant pause.
That's great. That actually segues nicely into this report, which is a report for a metacognitive exercise that we have at the end of every module that in an OLI course. It's called My Response, where there's an aggregation of all of the learning objectives in the material that they just encountered, and they're asked to assess their ability to answer questions with or without support. And this is delivered to you as the instructor, but they're also asked, some open-ended questions about what's least clear to them at this point and what they might like to ask their instructor. This is delivered to you in the dashboard, but what's one of the really powerful ways to use this is this hide student names feature up here. And then you can share this with your class without fear of it's in an anonymous format now. And now you can use this to show the students that their input is actually guiding your time together and the instruction. And they can see that their peers may have the same questions. They can see that actually taking part in this exercise is having an impact on the class. And you can use it to spur discussion. You can use it to create new exercises, however you want to use it. But this metacognitive activity has been really, really powerfully used.
Right, so Hal, this is one of my favorite things. One of the challenges that we all have in our classrooms is that you very often hear from a small subset of your students the most. And when we speak to diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the groups that I really am always thinking about are my introverts. They're not the ones that are going to raise their hands. They're not the one that are going to tell me they're struggling. They're not the one that's going to offer their opinion because of how uncomfortable they are in doing so. The beauty of something like the My Response is that they can see I am going to tailor my instruction to and certainly address their concerns, yet they can also do so from their place of being an introvert. And they're not penalized for it, and they don't get any less out of the class than the folks who are the ones who are willing to raise their hands. So I hope that by using tools like My Response, it is a way that I can really try to be as equitable in my classroom, both online and face-to-face, whenever we go back face-to-face, to showing them that I'm hearing them and that they are a valued part of the classroom.
That's great, thanks. Can you talk a little bit more about how, from a literal standpoint, you incorporate OLI into your teaching? Like, what is it how does it fit into your practice?
Sure. So it's been I've done it in a couple of different ways, right? So yes, Norman, I hope too that we go back to face-to-face someday soon. That would be wonderful. And so from a very literal standpoint, I have used OLI content as a traditional textbook replacement, right? It has been my course material for my class. I have taught both with it being a traditional lecture where I lecture every day and give the material and then assign them the work. I've also flipped it from a classroom perspective where I have assigned it ahead of time coming in. I find that to be the most valuable, especially to the students who actually complete the work ahead of time, right? And students themselves have said that they find that to be the most valuable. I've also taught classes that are a little outside of the mainstream lecture scenario using OLI content. We did this with our TACT grant. One of the things that we were charged with our TACT grant, because it was a Department of Labor grant, we needed to get students ready for employment. And we knew that our students might be technically ready as far as skills, but we also knew that when it came time to how they presented themselves in interviews and to our workforce partners, many of them were going to be challenged in that arena. We built content with OLI around professional image, workplace communications, and critical thinking. And we used OLI as a flipped classroom setting where we assigned students work and we looked at the aggregate results, but we used our physical class time as a place to do the role plays, to do the scenario building, to do the experiential learning and project-based scenarios that we knew our students needed to have really extensive practice with prior to them being engaged with our workforce partners and employers. We had tremendous results in that scenario. I would love, Norman, as you sit here, I would love to tell you that it was our results that were so phenomenal were completely and totally only due to OLI. I will tell you that that's not fair, right? We had students over the course of our grant in total and our partners served more than 1,000 students. We had completion rates that approached 80%, 79% of completion rates, which are really phenomenal. We had term-to-term retention rates in the 85 and 87% arena. OLI was certainly a contributing part of a lot of the services that we provided to those students. And I know that without the approach that OLI provided to us as instructors and content developers, the very thoughtful way that it allowed us to really focus on outcomes and skills, gave us the ability to produce students that were in that place. I also will share with you that out of that grant, 100% of our students who really intended to be employed at the end of that were employed. We had many students that had life challenges or that were career students and had no actual intention of being employed. But for all of our students who really, really, really intended to be employed, left with skills that were usable and they were earning family sustaining wages in their career field.
The TACT partnership is one of my favorites. Like I love to tell the story.
The workforce element, yes.
But I like to hear other people tell the story better. But I think, one of the points to push on there that, you're seeing two different pieces of intentional design. And one of these is intentionally designed courseware and an intentionally designed set of tools that is intended to provide certain supports. It can't do everything. It shouldn't be doing everything. But this emphasis on on designing it in ways that provides the supports that you need. And I think the other piece there is an intentionally designed partnership. I think our work with the National STEM Consortium, we really engaged in thoughtfully and with a clear sense of what it was that they needed from us as a partner.
So I think, Hal, we have to throw it to everyone. What questions do you have for us?
Yeah, we want to know everybody's questions. We would love to see some in the chat.
Kim and I also have a well rehearsed stand-up routine if you'd rather get that direct.
Okay. I was just thinking, how are we filling the gap, Norm?
Yeah. Norman, as long as you're not going to sing.
No, that's not, so well, I mean, I guess it would add to the humor, for sure.
That's what makes it funny.
No, seriously, MJ, it looked like did you have a question? I think I cut you off there.
No, not at all. I was just going to, I did add to the chat that, I think, Kim, you're absolutely right, that it's the tools that facilitate the redesign. And, those are the things that really matter. It's a mantra that we've been repeating, I think, so far all day long. So appreciate your feedback on your experiences with these tools.
Well, and of course, MJ, to your point, we've, as an instructor, I've redesigned courses that aren't ones that currently use OLI material as well. But the thoughtfulness around the intentionality and alignment of your objectives to your assessments, to your activities, the focus on the objective piece, while it seems so obvious, in practice can be much more challenging to actually accomplish. And the intentionality of that within OLI, I think, makes the iterative, your ability to continually improve your course so easy, when otherwise it may seem so daunting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we have not had any additional questions in the chat, so I think folks probably are starting to think about lunch. So join me in thanking Norman and Hal and Kim for joining us today. I'm so glad that we asked the providers to bring faculty along, because I think having, Kim, your perspective on this, and in the previous session, Julie Manley's from Coppin, just tremendously helpful. Which brings us into our next session, which is our faculty brown bag lunch session. So the idea is for you to, if you're like me, run downstairs, grab your lunch, and come back at about 12:15. And this is going to be an opportunity for you all to debrief a little bit, but to do it within disciplines. Up to this point, obviously, we've had two very different disciplines, psychology and engineering and are moving into now providing you with a place where you can join similar birds of a feather, so to speak, faculty to have conversations about not necessarily specific platforms, although that's fine too, but also about the courses that you're teaching with, or maybe teaching with, the adaptive platforms, and to hear from some folks who have, in your discipline, have had some success with that. So for example, if you're in the natural and physical sciences, you can join Ron Tavernier. I'm sure I'm going to butcher a lot of names. He's actually from SUNY Canton and has been working with tools in the social sciences, or excuse me, in the natural and physical sciences. Patrick Soleimani with George Mason is going to be speaking to folks in business about his success with using adaptive tools in the business field. In social sciences, Julie Manley will be returning to talk to folks who are interested in adaptive tools in those areas. Elena Klimova will be talking about mathematics. She's from Bowie State University. And in arts and humanities, Ann Prucha and Casey Tart will be talking about their use of tools down at the University of Central Florida. So please join us there. Nancy O'Neill has put in the chat the Zoom links to each of those sessions. And in about 2 or 3 minutes, she will also be sending an email to all of you so that you'll have that in your email as well, because we're about to close out this session. We'll hold off for just a couple of minutes so that you can click the link in the chat and get settled into your lunchtime session. But this will be closing down temporarily. If you come back to this link, it's going to say to you, the host has another session in progress. We will be coming back to this link at 1 o'clock. So hopefully this will work. If it doesn't work, please email cai@usmd.edu for further instructions, and we'll get you into the session that you want to be in. But for now, go ahead and click a link in the chat or look for your email that will give you these links as well. And we'll look forward to joining you for lunch. Thanks again to Hal and Kim and